There is one single Greek word in the New Testament that every modern church misuses, that every pastor mispronounces in meaning, if not in pronunciation, and that when you understand it correctly, changes everything you thought you knew about what a church is supposed to be. The word appears 114 times in the Greek New Testament. It is the word Jesus himself used when he announced that he would build something new, something that the gates of hell would not prevail against. And the moment you understand what Jesus actually meant when he said this word, you stop being able to see a single Sunday service the same way again. Before we get into it, let me tell you something. If you ended up at this video, it is probably because something in you got tired. Tired of sitting in services where the message felt nothing like the New Testament. Tired of being told that the building, the program, and the staff are what the New Testament called the church. 5 people, 5 lives, 1 book.
I'll be straight with you. I quit trusting pastors a long time ago. Got burned, plain and simple.
I've been a Christian my whole life, but I never once read that Bible on my own. But this book, Be Your Own Pastor, it taught me how to tell what's real from what's fake.
At 70 years old, I reckoned it was just too late for me to start over with the Lord. Well, I was wrong.
We started reading together right there at our kitchen table, and our home feels different now.
I wrote this book for people who are done being told what to believe. 3 protocols: discern, decide, defend, and exclusive bonuses inside.
I ain't angry no more. I'm just free.
First time ever, it was just me and the Lord, and it finally made sense. Be your own pastor. Be your own pastor.
Be your own pastor.
Be your own pastor.
Link in description. Now, the one word. The word is ἐκκλησία. Ekklesia, from 2 Greek roots, ek, meaning out of or from, and kaleō, meaning to call. Literally the called out ones, the ones summoned from somewhere else, the ones who have been drawn out of one identity and gathered into another. When Jesus says in Matthew 16, verse 18, "Upon this rock I will build my ἐκκλησία," this is the first time the word appears in the Gospels. It is the word that, in every English translation of the Bible, is rendered as the word church. And that single translation choice, church, has done more damage to the modern understanding of what Jesus actually said than perhaps any other translation decision in the history of the New Testament. Here is the problem. The English word church comes from the Old English civic, which came from the Germanic kirka, which came from the Greek kuriakon, meaning that which belongs to the Lord. Notice the path. The English word church does not come from the Greek word that Jesus used. The English word church comes from a different Greek word, kuriakon, that appears only twice in the New Testament, both times referring to the Lord's Supper or the Lord's Day, not to the body of believers. So when modern English speakers hear Jesus say, "I will build my church," they hear it through a Germanic word that suggests a building, an institution, a Lord's house. But that is not what Jesus said. Jesus said ἐκκλησία. And ἐκκλησία in the first century Greek world did not mean a building. It did not mean an institution. It meant something completely different. And to understand what Jesus actually said, we have to understand what his audience would have heard when he used that word. In the Greek city-states of the first century, Athens, Ephesus, Corinth, every Hellenistic city, the ἐκκλησία was a specific political institution. It was the assembly of free citizens, called out from their daily occupations by a town crier or herald, gathered to deliberate on the affairs of the city, to vote, to make decisions, to govern themselves. The ἐκκλησία was a self-governing assembly of free citizens. The word carried 0 religious connotation. It was a civic, political governance term. You can see this with your own eyes in the New Testament itself. Acts chapter 19, verses 32 and 39. Luke is describing the riot in Ephesus caused by Paul's preaching. The silversmiths who profited from the cult of Artemis had stirred up a mob. The mob filled the theater. Luke writes, "Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the ἐκκλησία was confused, and the most part knew not why they had come together." That word ἐκκλησία in verse 32 is the same word Jesus used for what he was building, and it is being used here to describe a riotous, confused, secular, political mob in a Greek theater. Same word. And in verse 39 of that same chapter, the city clerk addresses the same crowd and says, "If you seek anything about other matters, it shall be determined in the lawful ekklesia," the lawful assembly, a formal, regular governing body of free Ephesian citizens. Same word as Matthew 16, verse 18. Same word as every reference to the early Christian church throughout the New Testament. So when Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my ekklesia," his disciples, Jewish men who had grown up in Hellenistic Galilee, speaking and hearing Greek, did not hear the word church. They heard the word assembly, the word called out citizens, the word self-governing body of free people, the word that meant Athenian democracy and Ephesian town council and Corinthian civic deliberation. Jesus was announcing the founding of a new kind of assembly, not a building, not an institution, not a clerical hierarchy, an assembly of called out citizens of the kingdom of God, free, self-governing, deliberative, equal before the king who summoned them. And this changes everything about what a church is supposed to be. Let me show you how the misuse of this one word in modern Christianity has produced consequences that the New Testament never intended. First consequence: when church is heard as a building, believers think of Sunday morning attendance as the primary act of being a Christian. But Jesus did not promise to build a building. He promised to build an assembly of people. The building is incidental. The assembly is essential. And the assembly exists whether you meet in a cathedral, a living room, an underground catacomb, or a riverbank. The early church met in homes for the first 300 years of its existence. Acts 2 verse 46, Romans 16 verse 5, 1 Corinthians 16 verse 19, Colossians 4 verse 15, Philemon verse 2. The building came later, under Constantine in the 4th century, and what the early believers called ἐκκλησία became increasingly identified with the building rather than the assembly that met in it. Second consequence: when church is heard as an institution, believers think of the clergy as the church and the laity as the people who attend the church. But the ἐκκλησία in Jesus' mouth and in Paul's writing was the assembly of all believers together. There was no distinction between clergy and laity in the original Greek. The word presbyteros, elder, and episkopos, overseer, referred to functions within the assembly, not to a separate caste over the assembly. The hierarchical separation between clergy and laity is a later historical development, fully institutionalized only after the 3rd century, that has no foundation in the Greek of the New Testament. Third consequence: when church is heard as kuriakon, the Lord's house, believers think of the church as a place where the divine presence is concentrated, more than in their own homes, workplaces, or daily lives. But the ἐκκλησία in the New Testament is the people, not the place. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, Jesus says in Matthew 18, verse 18, there am I in the midst of them. The presence of Christ is not located in a building. It is located in the assembly of his called out citizens, wherever they gather. The hyperspatial sacralization of Sunday morning sanctuaries, kneeling at the altar, taking communion only inside the church building, treating the sanctuary floor as holier than the parking lot, is a residue of Old Covenant temple thinking smuggled into New Covenant assembly life. And fourth consequence, the deepest one, when church is heard as a building or an institution, believers stop seeing themselves as the called out citizens that Jesus actually addressed. They start seeing themselves as members of an organization, attendees at an event, consumers of a religious service. They lose the dignity that Jesus assigned them when he chose that word. The dignity of being a free citizen of the kingdom, summoned out of darkness into his marvelous light, deliberating together about the will of the king, governing themselves under the kingship of Christ. That dignity is what the word ἐκκλησία actually carries, and that dignity has been stripped from most modern English Christians because of one bad translation choice that has dominated English Bibles for 1400 years. Now, let me show you how this connects to a verse that almost every modern Christian misreads. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Notice the phrase, him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. The Greek for called you out is ekkalēsantos ak, the same ek that gives us ἐκκλησία, the same root. Peter is explaining what the assembly is. The assembly is the body of those who have been called out of darkness into light. And the corporate name for that body, the assembly of the called out ones, is ἐκκλησία. Same root, same word family. Same theology. You are the ἐκκλησία because you have been ekklēoed, called out, summoned, drawn from one identity, the identity of darkness, into another identity, the identity of marvelous light. And the moment you understand that the ἐκκλησία is not something you attend, it is something you are, you and every other believer, collectively, as the gathered free citizens of the kingdom of light. Let me show you one more layer. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament that the first century Jewish believers grew up reading, the word ἐκκλησία is used over 100 times to translate the Hebrew word kaleō. Kaleō means the gathered congregation of Israel, summoned before the Lord at Sinai, at the tabernacle, at the temple. The kaleō of the Old Testament was the entire people of God assembled in covenant before the Lord. And when the Greek translators rendered kaleō into Greek, the word they chose was ἐκκλησία. So when Jesus said, "I will build my ἐκκλησία," his Jewish disciples did not just hear the Greek civic term for an assembly of free citizens. They heard the Septuagintal echo of the call of Israel, the covenant assembly of God's people, the same theological category that defined Israel's identity as the people called out from Egypt, summoned before the Lord, gathered in covenant. Jesus was announcing that he was building the new kaleō, the new covenant assembly, the continuation, fulfillment, and expansion of God's gathered people, with himself as the rabbi and the Spirit as the breath of the assembly. That is the depth of what Jesus said in one word. And that is the depth that modern Christianity, by translating ἐκκλησία as church, has lost. Now, what do you do with this once you understand it? 3 things. First, recognize that the church you attend, however imperfectly, is supposed to be an ἐκκλησία, an assembly of called out citizens. If the structure of your Sunday gathering looks more like an auditorium with a performer on stage and silent consumers in the seats than a deliberative assembly of free citizens, that gathering has lost something the New Testament took for granted. You do not have to lead a revolution, but you should know what the original looked like. Second, recognize that you individually are a citizen of the ἐκκλησία of Christ, not a member of an organization, not an attendee of an event, a citizen, with all the dignities and responsibilities that citizenship implies, including the dignity of reading the scriptures for yourself, examining teachings critically, participating actively in the life of the body, and rejecting the laity-clergy hierarchy that the New Testament does not authorize. Third, recognize that the ἐκκλησία is bigger than your local congregation. The assembly of the called-out citizens spans every generation, every culture, every continent. When you read Wesley or Spurgeon, you are in fellowship with the ἐκκλησία across time. When you pray for a believer in Iran or Vietnam, you are in fellowship with the ἐκκλησία across space. The local church is one expression of the ἐκκλησία. It is not the whole of it. And when one local expression becomes unhealthy, you are still a citizen of the larger assembly that no man can revoke or remove you from. One word, ἐκκλησία. The word Jesus used. The word that grounds the entire New Testament's vision of what the body of believers is supposed to look like. And the word that, for 1,400 years of English translation history, has been quietly replaced with a Germanic synonym that does not carry the same meaning. The truth sets free. Christ said it himself in John 8, verse 32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The truth about the church is that it is an assembly of called-out citizens, not a building, not an institution, not a clergy. The truth about you is that you are a citizen of that assembly, with all the dignity that citizenship implies. The truth about Jesus is that he is the king of an assembly that meets wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, not only in the sanctuaries that bear his denomination's name. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. You will see more videos every week exposing truths that no modern pastor wants to preach. Share this video with someone who has confused the building with the assembly. Comment below what struck you most, the etymology of the word, the connection to Acts 19, or the connection to 1 Peter 2. Tired of suspecting deep down that you have been mistaught about the most basic word in the Christian vocabulary? I lived that. That is why I wrote Be Your Own Pastor, a serious biblical guide built around 3 practical protocols. Discern, to read the scriptures without an intermediary. Decide, to make the major decisions of your life without asking a leader's permission. And defend, to identify a false pastor in 30 seconds with a 4-question filter that no church elder wants you to learn, plus the 4 anchor verses of the universal priesthood analyzed in the original Greek, and the complete 12 traps of the false pastor field manual. The link is in the description of this video.